Thank you. So, I'm here today to tell you some stories that you might not usually hear at conferences like this, that you might not usually hear in the tech industry. If you want to follow along with the rather extensive sources that I used in putting this talk together, there is a QR code up there. I recommend scanning it with your phone. It will take you to a GitHub repository which has the whole list. I'm going to give you just a moment to do that. A moment has been given. Cool. To begin with, I would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation on whose land we meet today. This is and always will be Aboriginal land. Their sovereignty was never ceded. I also wouldn't be able to tell this story to you without the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mentors that I had growing up. They taught me many incredibly valuable lessons, but one of the most valuable lessons that they taught me was the importance of stories, being able to tell them, being able to share them. And I would also like to thank all of our sponsors who make conferences like this possible. It is great to be able to come here from Melbourne to talk to you all today. We would not be able to do it without the support of the sponsors. So to kick this off, I'm going to tell you two different stories about me. We're going to start with a rather simpler story. Hi, I'm Dawn Cooper. I am white. I am not straight. I am disabled. I am married. And I am, by the standards of most people in the IT industry, undereducated. I do not have a university degree. That is a nice list of demographic data which you would get from a lot of forms that people might fill out on CultureAmp or whatever sort of survey platform you might use when you're looking for demographic data about people who work for you. That's what you're going to get back from me. But if you ask me about the story that I want to tell you about myself, it looks a lot more like this. I like tinkering with clouds. I like tinkering with systems. I like making them secure. I like seeing if I can break them. I really like telling stories. I wouldn't, frankly, be standing up here on this stage in front of you all now. And as was said in the initial bio, outside of work, I am an occasional author, kitchen alchemist, and a raging sports ball fan. Those are two very different stories about the same person. Another story. This starts with a guy called Graham Farr, but this is not his story, so let me give you the very basic information here. He worked at the time that I started putting this talk together a few years ago, at a university in Melbourne, and one of the activities that he did outside of work was he ran these computer history tours of Melbourne. So you get a bunch of people together, you go around on public transport around the city of Melbourne and see all of the places that are relevant to computer history in Melbourne. We saw a whole bunch of old computers at the Computing Museum at said university. We went around into the city and we saw the house that the code breakers worked at during one of the world wars, which was great, top secret site, nobody was meant to know where it was. Of course, naturally, there were discussions on the tram about, yeah, that's the house where all of the spies work. But the reason why I'm here giving this talk to you today is because the next site that we went to is the Melbourne Observatory. And when you think computers, you probably think computers like the laptop that I'm presenting from today. But the Melbourne Observatory was part of the Computer History Tour of Melbourne, not because of those computers, but because of human computers. Young women, mostly unmarried, who sat for days on end, and their job was to observe the sky and make calculations. And you talk about women in computing. I can throw out names: Ada Lovelace, Grace Hopper, names that most people here will be familiar with to one degree or another. But we don't tell the story of those young women who were the first computers. Human brains parsing data. Now, there are a bunch of stories that when we talk about the IT industry, we do tell all the time about people who don't look like others. Stories about the trailblazers, And they are often focused on the good qualities that got people there. You know, the first female CEO, the first person of this demographic doing X, the first black person to speak at conference Y. Strength, perseverance, resilience are the themes that you always hear in these stories. How many times people had to knock at the door before they were able to get in? And that's one genre of story that people in the IT industry are really, really good at telling. Unfortunately, there's also another genre of stories which we are really, really good at telling. And those are the stories of people who walk away. When we look at people, the trailblazers, it's all about, these stories are goal-oriented. We're not talking about people coming together and building solutions to the problems that they have. We're talking about one specific person often who just knocks repeatedly on the door until they get in. But that's not particularly sustainable. There are a whole bunch of reasons why people walk away, which have been delineated by a whole bunch of journalists talking about systemic problems in the IT industry. Contributions of people who look different or communicate differently are often devalued. Sometimes that can be as simple as English is not your first language, and you are exceptionally good at coding, but you are working with the difficulty of having to translate everything that you say into highly technical, essentially jargon, in another language. Sometimes that can be because of lack of sponsorship from managers, because if you don't look like your manager, if you don't relate to your manager, if your manager doesn't relate to you, it can be much harder for you to tell a compelling story to them of, hey, here's why I'm doing a really good job here. There are also a whole lot of unequal expectations in the IT industry, and my favorite example of this is employee resource groups. Let's get a bunch of people who have interest in this together. Seen it for accessibility, seen it for gender, I've seen it for different cultural backgrounds. And those groups, when you walk into the room, often they do not have external sponsors. They are often made up solely of members of that demographic, and they are often unpaid. That is a bunch of busy work which you are doing on top of your day-to-day job. And I can say from personal experience, from that little list of demographics that I started with, being the only X in the room is really exhausting for any value of X. Sometimes you don't want to be the person that people go to asking you about accessibility problems because you're the only one that knows anything or cares. Sometimes you just want to be an engineer. Sometimes you just want to solve the problems that you were hired to solve. But this is why we talk about resilience so much, because it's the resilience to withstand a death by 1,000 cuts of not only needing to do your job, but doing jobs which really should be other people's jobs as well. So how do we fix this? Well, it kind of starts with portals, and it kind of starts with all of us being here today. Because a lot of people who don't look like your standard, stereotype of a person in the tech industry don't necessarily find the tech industry through going to university and doing a computer science degree. Sometimes they make their way into the tech industry because they have an interesting problem that they want to solve, and they start tinkering. They start coding. They start building. They start putting together software. They start putting together hardware. And I will talk for days on end about NVDA, the free and open source screen reader for Windows, which is one of the best examples, not necessarily that the people who created this came through that pipeline, but this is one of the best examples of people taking a problem that they had and going, okay, we are blind or vision impaired. We need screen readers which work and don't cost the earth. We can solve for this. So where do communities come in? And there are two kind of takes on this. If you are in the very early stages of your time in the tech industry, find the giants. Find the people who can help you. Find the people who can advise you. Find the people who can talk to you about the ways that they have failed. The things that you might not know when you're just starting out trying to solve some sort of problem. Like, okay, if you want to build open source software and there are people using it, you're going to need community management skills. Or these sorts of front-end frameworks are not going to work well for the thing that you're trying to do. Or, okay, I get that a document database might seem appealing because it's super easy to set up, but once you get into linked data structures, you are absolutely going to need relational databases for this. You should probably do it earlier rather than later. And then once you get into a later phase, once you're involved in setting up these communities, once you're embedded, be the giant that you had, or be the giant that you wanted to have. Support the people around you to learn from failure. Yours, theirs, the failures that are publicly documented. And bounce ideas off each other. That's one of the most valuable aspects of community. If you can start by meeting people where they are and listening to the problems that they want to solve, sometimes providing that different perspective can help them get from, okay, I just want to solve this, to where they eventually need to be. And meet people where they are is going to be a whole theme of this kind of thing. Have any of you heard of WorldCoin? Bunch of blank looks. Cool. Have any of you heard of Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI? Okay, yeah, that's got a few more hands. One of Sam Altman's side projects is a cryptocurrency called WorldCoin. The way that one acquires WorldCoin is by showing up to people who have iris scanning machines to have your eyeballs scanned. It's basically just a giant collection vehicle for biometric data, which it would be fair to say was very much being pushed in developing countries. Like, the government of Kenya actually kicked the WorldCoin people out of the country. But this is fundamentally a problem of Sam Altman, who I don't know if he'd ever set foot in Kenya in his life before coming up with this idea, did not have the understanding of, what do I actually need to do to meet these people where they are? WorldCoin is trying to solve a problem which doesn't actually exist. And outside solutions often treat marginalized people as though they are the product. Like, if you're not paying for this, you're probably being sold to. And this is a huge, it's kind of one of the things which often pushes people away from the tech industry is if they don't feel like there's value to them being in the room, if they don't feel like they can solve the problems that they come up with, the problems that they want to see solved, then we're just going to keep ending up with this cycle of people trying to solve the wrong problems because they don't understand. They don't have the experience, or they don't have the connections to people who do have the experience to understand what the problems are that need to be solved. That list of demographic data. One of the really interesting experiences that I have had in the tech industry is walking into a room and I look around and I go, everyone here looks really similar, and none of them look like me. And that can be a really, really confronting experience. Because if I look at myself in the, people like me, people who are similar to me in the tech industry, often what I'm seeing is a bunch of case studies. I'm reading those articles about trailblazers who are persevering through all of these problems, and I'm going, great, but that's not a solution to a systemic problem. So give people rooms where there are others that look like them. Give people rooms where you can look around and go, hey, everyone here looks different. So where do we go from here? If you are building communities, there are a bunch of different things that you can do. Your code of conduct is the sign on the gate. DDD Perth has a really good code of conduct. Everyone here has agreed to it by being here. There are a whole bunch of resources that you can find to do this well. There are a whole bunch of open source codes of conduct that you can take and remix. But the important thing here is have one, make sure that people understand it, make sure that you actually enforce it. That is going to go a long way to making sure that people feel comfortable in the space. Support people to get involved, and there are a bunch of different ways that you can do that. Travel stipends for speakers who might not be able to travel otherwise. Programs to get people more involved with the community. Childcare at events, that's a huge one, because that's a demographic burden that very much falls particularly on one gender of people. Difference should be ordinary and celebrated. I don't want to just walk into rooms where there are a bunch of people who look different, and some of them look like me, and some of them don't, and we can have conversations. I want to see that translate into the workplace as well. And the way that we can do that is by listening to people about what they need in the workplace. Check retention rates, not hire rates. You can say, great, 50% of the people that we've hired in the last year are people with disabilities, but if 90% of those walked out after 6 months, what have you actually achieved? We should not have to ask who's not in the room. We should be able to walk in and see people like us there without having to put in the effort. We should be able to see people like us on stages speaking. We should be able to see people like us on leadership roles. And the way that you support that is by giving people a clear path from point A to point B. It's not just about getting them in the room. It is about supporting the people whose stories we don't tell, so that we can start telling stories about people building solutions to their own problems. We can start telling stories about teams who come up with really, really innovative solutions, rather than every second headline being about people like Sam Altman and his WorldCoin. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. Otherwise, I am always contactable via email. There is a GitHub repository, the link back at the bottom of the GitHub repository from earlier, which will take you to all of the other conference talks that I have given. It was lovely to be able to be here and speak to you all today. Thank you so much.